Have you ever stopped to really think about how biologists make sense of the literal millions of different species on Earth? I mean, from microscopic bacteria to giant towering redwood trees, the sheer diversity of life is just staggering. How on earth do we find order in all that chaos? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack the foundational principles that help scientists decode the living world. We'll look at how life is organized, the grand unifying theory that connects, well, everything, and exactly how scientists go about proving their ideas without just guessing.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we've got the unifying themes of biology. Second, evolution, the core theme. Third, the process of scientific inquiry. Fourth, a really cool case study on mouse camouflage. And fifth, science as a social process. Let's get into it.
Section 1. Unifying themes of biology. Finding order in the chaos.
Think of these themes as the fundamental rules of the game. They're basically the cheat codes to understanding biology. They help us filter out all the massive noise in the natural world so we can actually build a comprehensive framework. Whether you're looking at a single tiny cell or an entire rainforest, these 5 themes, organization, information, energy and matter, interactions, and evolution, they always apply. Let's look at a few of these up close.
Starting with the theme of organization, let's imagine zooming our camera way out to the macro level. We begin with the Earth's biosphere, literally everywhere life exists. But as we zoom in, we step down through this biological hierarchy. We move into a specific North American mountain meadow ecosystem, then down to the biological community of plants and animals living in it, then to a specific population of mule deer, and finally to individual organisms. And the crazy thing is, at every single step, we find incredible structural order.
Let's keep zooming in, pushing for an ever finer resolution. Inside a single plant from that meadow, we find its organs, the leaves. Inside the leaves are tissues made of individual cells. Inside those cells are tiny functional components called organelles, like the chloroplast, which, at the very bottom level, is made up of molecules of chlorophyll. Now here's what's absolutely crucial: the concept of emergent properties. As you move up from a simple molecule to a whole complex leaf, new properties literally emerge based on how those parts interact. A disorganized soup of chlorophyll molecules, it can't perform photosynthesis, but arrange them perfectly inside a chloroplast, and boom, suddenly they capture the sun's energy. It's like a giant puzzle.
Moving on to the information theme, it's just fascinating to look at how genetic data is actually transmitted. Before any cell divides, it copies its DNA, that beautiful double helix structure. But this DNA isn't just a static blueprint, it's active information. The sequence of nucleotides along a gene is transcribed into mRNA and then translated into a specific chain of amino acids. Those then fold up into a perfectly functional protein. For example, your very own DNA contains the exact instructions to build what are called crystalline proteins. These pack together super tightly to form the transparent lens of your eye, which is literally allowing you to watch this explainer right now. How wild is that?
And that brings us brilliantly to our next theme, energy and matter. You really have to notice the fundamental difference in how these two things move through an ecosystem. Light energy from the sun enters the system, it's converted to chemical energy by plants, used by consumers, like a hungry caterpillar, and eventually it exits the system completely as heat. So energy flows in just one direction. But matter, chemicals are continuously cycled. The carbon and the nitrogen in the soil get taken up by plants, eaten by animals, and then returned right back to the soil by decomposers to be used all over again. It's the ultimate recycling program.
Part 2. Evolution, the core theme, the ultimate unifier.
There's this famous statement by Theodosius Dobzhansky, one of the founders of modern evolutionary theory, that perfectly captures the climax of what we're talking about today. He said, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." Evolution is the one, single idea that makes logical sense of everything we know about living organisms. It's the core theme explaining both the incredible unity of life, like the fact that entirely different organisms share the exact same genetic code, and the staggering diversity of millions of species perfectly suited to their unique environments. Charles Darwin famously called this process descent with modification, and it's driven by a mechanism you've definitely heard of, natural selection. Let's picture this. Imagine a beetle population colonizes an environment with dark soil. Now, the population has some natural, heritable variations in color. Some are light, some are dark. A predator, let's say a hungry bird, can easily spot the light-colored beetles against that dark dirt, right? So it eats them. The dark beetles survive and reproduce. Over a few generations, that dark trait becomes increasingly common. The natural environment has literally selected the most advantageous adaptation. It's pretty straightforward when you break it down. Section 3. The process of scientific inquiry. How do we know?
So, okay, we have these grand, sweeping themes like organization and evolution. But how does scientists actually prove them? Because they definitely don't just sit in an armchair and philosophize. They engage in rigorous, real-world investigation. The absolutely crucial point here is separating our everyday language from strict scientific terminology. In everyday conversation, people toss around the word theory or hypothesis to mean, just a random guess. But in science, a hypothesis is a highly structured explanation based on observation. And most importantly, it absolutely must be testable. If you can't design an experiment or make an observation to test it, well, it simply isn't a scientific hypothesis.
This breaks down the iterative, super-logical steps researchers have to follow to decode the laws governing nature. It starts out simple, with an observation. You look at something and ask a question. Then, you form that hypothesis. From there, you make a deductive prediction using if-then logic. Basically, if my hypothesis is true, then this specific thing should happen. Next, you run a carefully controlled test, and you analyze the result. If the result doesn't match the prediction, no big deal. You just go back to the drawing board and revise the hypothesis. It's an ongoing loop.
Section 4. Case study, mouse camouflage. Let's look at some science in action.
Let's ground this in a classic real-world experiment conducted by biologist Hopi Hoekstra and her students, so we can see natural selection in real time. Our investigation begins by observing two drastically different habitats located pretty close to each other in Florida. Out on the coast, you have these beautiful, brilliant white sand beaches with sparse clumps of pale grass. But if you travel just a little ways inland, the environment changes rapidly to a much darker, more fertile soil covered in thicker vegetation. Totally different vibes.
Now, think about the inhabitants of these areas. The two mice we're looking at belong to the exact same species, Paramuscus paleonotus. Yet the mouse living on the beach has this light, dappled fur that perfectly blends into the white sand. Meanwhile, the mouse living just a few miles inland has a much darker coat that matches the dark dirt. To survive visual hunters, like hawks, owls, and foxes, these populations have developed completely different coat colors to match their specific backgrounds. The researchers hypothesized that this coloration evolved as a direct adaptation to protect them from being eaten.
But remember our rule. A hypothesis must be tested. So Hoekstra's team actually built hundreds of little silicone mouse models, painting half of them light and the other half dark. They placed equal numbers of both types in the beach habitat and then again in the inland habitat. The next morning, they went out and literally counted the bite marks and claw gouges on the models. And wow, the results were striking. In both environments, the non-camouflaged mice, so the dark models on the bright beach and the light models on the dark inland soil, they suffered significantly higher predation rates. This powerfully, definitively confirmed the hypothesis. Natural selection favors the trait that provides the best camouflage.
Part 5. Science as a social process beyond the laboratory.
Contrary to what you see in popular movies and cartoons, science is really rarely conducted by a lone, isolated genius having some eureka moment in a dark, dusty laboratory. The real scientific process is an intensely social and circular activity. Yes, you have that core circle of forming and testing hypotheses, but that core, it's entirely surrounded by exploration, reading other scientists' literature, and deep community analysis. Scientists constantly share their results through peer-reviewed publications. They replicate each other's experiments just to be sure. They argue, they debate. And all of this is influenced by societal needs, like the push to cure diseases or solve huge environmental issues. Science builds upon the work of others. Like Isaac Newton once said, it's really all about standing on the shoulders of giants. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge. Take what we've covered today and actually apply it. Look out your window right now or take a walk outside later. You've got the framework now, the unifying themes of organization, energy flow, and information. You understand the profound power of evolutionary adaptation. So how are these forces playing out in your very own backyard right this second? What tiny adaptations can you spot in the birds, the insects, or even the weeds growing through the sidewalk? The world is literally full of biological mysteries just waiting to be understood, so get out there and observe them with a scientist's eye. Thanks for learning with me today.